Today we will talk about how spiritual progress occurs. Rupa has shared a very interesting verse with you. That is, Rupa has described the principles of spiritual progress in one verse. First, faith. The fact is that the Lord says, I strengthen a person's faith. He speaks about this in the Bhagavad Gita. That is, if a person is an atheist, I will give him faith. Understanding, to deepen one's atheistic understanding of the world. Nevertheless, he will encounter the phenomenon of me. He will simply perceive this phenomenon trying to exclude me, the source of the primary cause of everything. Or conversely, if a person possesses some form of faith, a rather primitive religious concept, at this moment, they are at a certain stage of evolution. I will strengthen their faith to allow them to transition to a deeper level. Therefore, we cannot say that 1, 2, 3, 4, it's all nonsense. Or you teach arithmetic, but there is also mathematics, and there is also higher mathematics, and so on. Oh, you know nothing about quantum physics. You just happen to be in a physics class. Therefore, God does not violate our faith, and yet He is interested in our progression. How does He do this? Sometimes with Shadat, and sometimes with Adusanga. He gives those who possess some faith the opportunity for more perfect communication. And if we are interested in a certain topic, we see that artificial intelligence suggests some videos to us on YouTube. The same goes for the Lord. He is like a cosmic intelligence. As soon as He senses that we have a certain thought or interest, people and books start appearing around us, and we can extract that spiritual knowledge if we are open to it. A very important question is openness. Openness is a rather rare feeling because it is the opposite of our pride. I know, I understand, and you do not teach me. Openness is a very important quality of a spiritual person, and faith provides him with communication. Interestingly, in communication, faith deepens. Therefore, we must remember that we are always believing in something, and we continually deepen our faith through communication as long as we act according to this principle and embrace deeper ideas. Then, action begins. In other words, we act in accordance with our faith. We can say whatever we want, write whatever we want for ourselves, and put whatever we want in our profile. But our actions determine our faith. Our faith must be constantly deepened, and only then can we achieve some stable position on the spiritual path. The example is very simple. A person builds a business. At first, he does not believe in himself, but then at some point he says, no, I can do this. I can do this myself. He starts working somewhere, gaining experience, and then begins to engage in some business on his own, and it works out for him. And he constantly deepens his knowledge in management, marketing, finance, and so on. This allows him to build his own business and grow. And at every stage of business, it grows. If one stops self-improvement, then their business also typically stops growing. That is, either competitors absorb him, or a more relevant product enters the market, or the times change, and what he does, produces, or the services he provides become irrelevant. Conversely, something new takes off and emerges. Therefore, a wise person who is engaged in development, business, or knowledge constantly keeps their finger on the pulse, looking for what is new, how the market is changing, how marketing is changing, how the attitude towards the product is changing, how this entire system is structured. And he immerses his consciousness, constantly developing to some degree. Then he becomes successful. And when people leave the business, sell it, or abandon it, when they say, I can no longer keep up with the evolution, I am already, so to speak, outdated. Yes, my mind is outdated. I am just so old school. I cannot accept some new trends, new realities. This happens. A similar state can occur for a person on the spiritual path. They accept certain postulates, develop some neural connections, form associations, and adopt certain religious principles, leading them to stop evolving in this world because they believe they have already achieved some form of perfection. And then he remains at a certain stage of spiritual development, and his whole life becomes not a life but an existence. Essentially, we live only as long as we develop. When we stop developing internally, our life comes to an end. We merely exist as biological bags, biological bodies. Yes, we see, hear, feel, and touch, but we do not empathize with the divine. And that is the most frightening thing. Therefore, many people have some limit to their spiritual development. What causes this? It is due again to their nature, karma, the company they keep, and their desire. Because some person may practice spiritual practices very actively in their youth, but then does not achieve the expected results and thinks, well, yes, I have been too focused on meditation and spiritual development. It's time to live for myself, and starts to accumulate something material. As a result, their spiritual progress comes to an end. He may marry a very spiritual girl, and then it may turn out that both he and the girl, so to speak, lose interest in spiritual progress. Then they stop being interested in each other, and eventually they realize that they are different people with different interests. And they live together. Well, that often happens because they are already cohabitants. They have some shared property, a common space, and children are born there. These children actually start living their own third life. And a person is like, wow, I have lived my whole life and lived with strangers in one house. We don't understand each other. I have no common goals. But there was a time when that was the case, and now everything has changed, and so on. Life is in essence an ever-changing and dynamic component. How can we indeed truly progress in accordance with the hand of the Lord? Faith, communication, service, and stability. Faith and trust must be constantly deepened. Communication should constantly deepen our faith. This communication should generate in us a sense of service, which means active activity, both internal and external. It can manifest more as an internal activity, such as prayer and meditation, or as an external activity like direct service to the deity, communication, preaching, and so on. It is a kind of closed loop, a spiral, not even a circle, but a spiral along which we ascend. That is, we must remember that everything always goes in a spiral, and in life, everything always comes in a spiral. Situations also come to us in a spiral. If we have not worked through this situation in life, it will return to us karmically, and very often we think that we have already gone through this. No, it has not passed. Why? Because desire is still in the heart, pride is still present, and ambitions still exist. These ambitions make me step on the same rake, making the same mistake. And often life indeed punishes us very harshly for the lessons we have not learned. Once it didn't pass, twice it didn't pass, 3 times it didn't pass, and the number has dropped to a certain level on one hand. But on the other hand, we need to understand how this is like the DNA spiral. That is, we have 2 parallel things: our external life that we live and our internal life that we cultivate within. And often, in fact, these are 2 completely parallel realities. And when we begin to practice consciously and deeply, often influenced by suffering or some complex life situations, then this external pressure of our circumstances becomes a stimulus for our spiritual practice. Therefore, people think that they should always be happy. They do not understand that in unhappiness, we sometimes gain much deeper feelings of experience and deeper realizations called repentance than when we are happy. Because when I am happy, I tend to take my spiritual progress very lightly. When I am unhappy, due to some external circumstances, I am forced to retreat into my inner world. That is why this world has duality, happiness and unhappiness. It serves as a stimulus. The stimulus was a sharpened stick that was poked into the bull's rear to make it move in ancient Rome. Therefore, karma is structured in such a way that it always stimulates us. Through happiness and suffering, life itself drives us towards perfection. And here, as they say, the more the bull resists, the more it has to be stimulated. Therefore, if we are inclined to always move forward, and life gives us a little push from behind, but not too painfully, then this is a normal process, and we accept it. But if we, like a bull, have dug in and taken our position somewhere, it is quite possible that we will receive a very strong jab from some direction that will force us to move regardless. Therefore, on the spiritual path, we must accept this principle and not resist it. A very important point is the acceptance of some difficult life circumstances, because often we want our plan to be executed exactly like this. This is exactly how we see the plan. We have this engineering, right, left, and then here, and the door is just a little bit 3 steps in that direction, but we do not see this door. Why? Because of our pride and because we are trying to go on our own. But we forget that we have the Lord, guardian angels, and spiritual teachers who guide us through life, and we sever our connection with the higher world through our pride. In what sense do we sever it? At that moment, we believe that we are the masters of our own fate, that we alone accept our destiny, and that we alone bear responsibility for our fate, and that is true. In Chaitanya Charitam, it is very well described that all forms of happiness and unhappiness come to us on their own. For example, we do not plan for misfortunes and suffering. We do not plan for illnesses or difficulties. We sit and plan when a bad mood should come to me in the morning, and I will accept this bad mood, but we somehow plan for happiness to come to us. Here are the actions that will lead me to happiness. Although the Vedas tell us that if you eat properly, if you communicate properly, if you relate properly to the surrounding world, you will suffer less. But the Vedas do not say that you will not suffer at all. Why? Because the Vedas do not actually consider suffering to be indeed bad. It's like, for example, in school, it's not considered bad to get 2s or 3s. From a certain perspective, we may suffer and struggle because I didn't learn the lesson and passed it with 2s and 3s. But a 2 and a 3 are quite critical assessments that help us understand what level of understanding we are at. Therefore, school and pedagogy imply punishment, incentive, and good grades. In this way, a person learns. If we exclude these criteria from our lives, then we will be in a state of suspension, and we will not understand where to move. The criteria clearly guide us in our movement. Nevertheless, it is important to always understand that our highest understanding of the world is a reprogramming through the eyes of more perfected individuals. We may not be able to come to any deep spiritual realizations ourselves, We do not have the opportunity to meditate in the Himalayas or perform any yagas and sacrifices, but can you imagine? We read the Shaman Bhagava, the stories of great sages, and these stories captivate our hearts. And then we read the same stories 5-10 years later, and we see that we hear these stories differently now. Then we read these stories at the end of our lives, and these stories touch us even more deeply. And then in the next life, suddenly we find ourselves with the smart bag again, and we read this story and think, we have heard this before. It weighs on our hearts. Why? Because there is an eternal process of spiritual knowledge, an eternal process of truth, an eternal process of enlightenment and inspiration, and we are walking along it. We constantly make mistakes. We always do some things wrong. But the Lord, out of His mercy and compassion, can grant His grace upon us if we strive for faith, communication, and service, and we can establish ourselves in spiritual knowledge. When we establish ourselves in spiritual knowledge, it is yet another new stage. At each stage, everything begins anew. Even deeper faith, even deeper communication, even more refined service. This does not mean that I have reached some kind of enlightenment, as Buddhists say, and that I must kill the Buddha. I have already attained enlightenment. That's it, Buddha. I have killed you. That's it. Go away. Don't disturb me. I am now great. This is quite an illusory idea. Rather, its main meaning is not that you must kill the Buddha, but that your materialistic notions of the spiritual will be shattered. However, that's not a problem. New understandings of the spiritual will come, and they will be more perfect, more subtle, and more based on truth than on some imperfect image of your mind. So we grow up. In childhood, we want to be ice cream sellers, astronauts, and suddenly we find ourselves thinking, wait a minute, and we realize that I don't want to work as an ice cream seller at all. And in general, space exploration doesn't interest me at all. In this regard, we remember that at each stage there is a reevaluation and reassessment of values, and this is evolution. Thank you. All the best. Stay in touch.